saw in his dream that couldn't be furthest from the truth. And the evidence is ample in the Quran and in the Sunnah. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this journey. And He talks about مَا كَذَبَ الْفُؤَادُ مَا رَأَى. That the mind, the eyesight did not dissuade the Prophet ﷺ. It did not disbelieve him or belie him. مَا زَاغَ الْبَصَرُ وَمَا طَغَى. His eyesight was vigilant. It did not transgress the limits. It was not delusional. Furthermore, the mushrikeen of Quraysh wanted to use this as an opportunity, because the Prophet ﷺ, when he returned, he told them that he was taken on a journey by night from Al-Masjid al-Haram to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And he returned after, of course, going through the Isra and the Mi'raj into the seventh heaven and beyond. عند سدرة المنتهى عندها جنة المأوى. Near the Sidra, the tree of the final place anyone can ascend, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, عندها جنة المأوى. And the Prophet ﷺ has seen what's in paradise. And the Prophet ﷺ has seen what's in the hellfire. And the story goes on, and as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ رَأَى مِنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِ الْكُبْرَى. And the word ra'a means he had seen from the greater signs of his Lord, from the greater ayat of his Lord. And one of the rules of interpreting the Quran is that when the Quran speaks in plain language, you cannot misinterpret that or interpret it in a way that is not mentioned in the Quran unless you have compelling evidence. So therefore, there is ample evidence in the Quran, and we know from the seerah that the Prophet ﷺ, and also from the Quran, that the Prophet ﷺ saw Jibreel alayhi salam twice. The first time is that when he received the message. What I mean by that, he saw him in his true image with 600 wings. كَانَ يَسُدُّ الْأُفُقِ. When the Prophet ﷺ, after he left the Ghar of Hira, after he received the message, he looked into the sky and he saw Jibreel alayhi salam in his true image. وَكَانَ يَسُدُّ الْأُفُقِ means he blocked the view of the heavens. That's how massive this creation is. And then he has seen him. وَلَقَدْ رَآهُ نَزْلَةً أُخْرَى عِنْدَ سِدْرَةِ الْمُنْتَهَى. He has seen him a second time during the night of Mi'raj. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala attested that. And of course, the mushrikeen wanted to use this as an evidence. How could someone, and with the superficial way of thinking, they focus on the worldly journey. They did not focus on the heavenly journey, which is far, greater in distance than the worldly journey, which is from Mecca to Al-Quds. They said it takes a month to 2 months to go and return. How could the Prophet ﷺ have done this in just few minutes? And then they wanted to use this as an evidence to put between him and his companions, particularly Abu Bakr. But they did not know the Iman of Abu Bakr. They didn't have a taste of what Iman means. And when they went to him and they said, "Oh Abu Bakr, your friend Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam," he said that he went from Mecca to Al-Quds and returned in few minutes. And it takes us 2 months to do this. Abu Bakr unequivocally said, إِن كَانَ قَالَ فَقَدْ صَدَقَ. إِن كَانَ قَالَ فَقَدْ صَدَقَ. If that's what he said, then he's spoken the truth. Because before even the message was sent to him, he was commissioned with the message of Islam, he was known among everyone, his friends and his enemies, as as-sadiq al-amin, the truthful in everything that he says. Al-amin, the trustworthy, that people trusted him with everything. On this journey, as we know also that the Prophet ﷺ, when he went to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and when we talk about Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, we talk about the city that is inside the old fence. Means that the entirety of the old city, that's called Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. When we see the dome, that golden dome, or looks like copper on the top, that is the dome of the rock. That is only one part of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Only one part of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa was built about 120 years after the sending of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So the Dome of the Rock was there. It was opened at the time, Jerusalem was opened at the time of Umar ibn Khattab, radiyallahu wa ardah, and that was in the 15th year of the Hijrah. And so therefore, people who moved from the Arab Peninsula into Jerusalem, into what's known now as Palestine, they moved over 3,000 years prior to the birth of Isa alayhi salam. So that is well over 5,000 years. And then you get a bunch of gangsters, mafia, that basically has taken over the land and over the sacred places with the help of their affiliates. And they claim that 75 years ago, 80 years ago, there was nobody living there. So one of the political analysts responded. He said, the evidence is ample, but to give you something that fits your size, to give you something that fits your status, if you just go look at the sewage lines, just look at the sewage lines, and that's where you fit. They were established way before you moved in. Let alone the fact that it was the place that Ibrahim alayhi salam migrated to. It was the place that, Jazakallah khair. It was the place that Isa alayhi salam was born. And we recite that day in and day out in Surah Maryam. That they were basically, this is the land of the prophets and the messengers. So they claim to be followers of Musa alayhi salam, and at the same time they deny the fact that Musa alayhi salam died just about within a stone throw from Jerusalem. They deny the fact that Isa alayhi salam was born and raised there. They deny that this is the land of the prophets and the messengers, and this is the descension of the Wahi, Jibreel alayhi salam. And they have the audacity to claim that 80 years ago nobody lived there. Subhanallah. So on this night of journey, which I want to highlight the significance of Jerusalem to Muslims. Jerusalem does not belong just to the Palestinians. Just like Mecca and Medina do not belong just to the Saudis. They are waqf, meaning that they belong to the entirety of the Muslim Ummah. It should be of concern and a measure of everybody's iman how concerned you are with the historical references, how concerned you are with the religious significance of these cities. The Prophet ﷺ in the authentic hadith said, لا تشد الرحال إلا لثلاث. That one cannot travel with the intention that they are worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except to three masajid. Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, Masjid al-Nabawi in the Medina, and Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. So it's an ibadah to take that journey, and yet now you see that people are just playing around with the sacred places of the Muslims, unaware of the lethal consequences and the detrimental consequences of their actions, which inshallah, and that's in accordance with Western politicians, that the life of so-called Israel is somewhere between 1 and 3 years and it'll vanish. But we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to honor the Prophet ﷺ and to submit to him and to maintain the fact that this is the first qibla for the Muslims. This is the place where we pray towards. Our ancestors among the Muslim Ummah prayed towards Al-Quds. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet ﷺ, قَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. Then the qibla was changed. But the significance is still there. The Prophet ﷺ, when he went on a journey by night, and he put his dabba, the animal, the buraq that he was riding, and it was leap. Every leap is like as far as the eyesight can reach. He tied this buraq near the wall that is called ha'it al-buraq, the wall of the buraq. What do they call it now? They call it the Wailing Wall. Then the Prophet ﷺ led the salah inside al-Masjid al-Qibali. Al-Masjid al-Qibla is the one that is furthest south, closest to the Qibla, with the green dome. That's called al-Masjid al-Qibli, which is part of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And the Prophet ﷺ, in an enclave in the masjid, he led 120 to 124,000 prophets and messengers, signifying that he's the leader of all the prophets and the messengers. And then he ascended from the dome of the rock, inside that golden dome, the masjid that you see with the golden dome, that is referred to as the golden rock. He ascended from there to the heavens. And he, asked permission with Jibreel alayhi salam to ascend through the first heaven. And that permission was granted. And then he saw Adam alayhi salam. And he saw that when Adam looks to the right, he sees so many people. And when he looks to the left, he sees so many people. He looks to the right, he smiles. He looks to the left, he cries. The Prophet ﷺ inquired as to why. He said, the people on his right are the people of paradise. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us among them. And the people of the hellfire are on his left. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from it. Then he ascends to the second heaven, and the same thing. They would ask for permission, and permission is granted. They greet the second dwellers of the second layer of the heavens, and then he sees Isa alayhi salam. And he sees his cousin Zakaria. And then he ascends to the third. He sees Idris alayhi salam. And to the fourth, and he sees Yusuf alayhi salam. And then he ascends to the fifth, and he says Harun, Aaron. And to the sixth, and he sees Musa alayhi salam. And to the seventh, and he sees Ibrahim alayhi salam, the father of most of the prophets and the messengers. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, as he's being greeted, he greets back and he said, بَلِّغْ أُمَّتَكَ مِنِّي السَّلَامِ. Convey my salam to your ummah. وعليه وعلى سائر الأنبياء والمرسلين السلام. وأخبرهم, roughly translated, tell them that this paradise has extremely fertile ground. And the water is so pure. And the ghars, what you saw in this dunya, in your place in paradise, is Subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar. Some of the scholars refer to this as al-baqiyat al-salihat, that these are the remaining good deeds. And some of them, in fact, in the authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, for me to say Subhanallah, walhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar, is better than this dunya in its entirety. It's better than this dunya in its entirety. And then he ascends beyond that, and Jibreel alayhi salam tells him, if you ascend, you will penetrate. If I ascend beyond this point, I will burn. And then he received the 5 daily prayers, of course, starting with 50, and then down to, the number was lessened until it reached 5. And every time as he descends, Musa alayhi salam asks him, inquires, what did your Lord commission you with? And the Prophet ﷺ will tell him. He said, by Allah, my people are much tougher than yours, and they were commissioned with that which is far less, and they could not do it. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said no. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, 5 salawat, for each salawat 10 folds. So we pray 5 daily prayers, and we receive the reward of 50 salawat. And then the Prophet ﷺ descends. Why was this journey? What is the wisdom behind this journey taking place in that time? These times were some of the most difficult times that the Prophet ﷺ has experienced in delivering the message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To the extent that the last resort that he went to convey the message to the people of the Ta'if, who were located between the 2 mountains, they sent the foolish ones after him, stoning him literally, until he was able, with the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to escape this persecution. And then he sat in the shade of a tree. And then Jibreel alayhi salam comes to him. And look what he tells him. He said, command me, and I shall close these 2 mountains on these people. He said, no. That's the prophet of mercy. This is the messenger of mercy. He said, no, perhaps some of their offsprings will be believers. And then, of course, shortly before that, his wife Khadija passed away. And then his uncle passed away. So things felt like they were closing in on him on the face of the earth. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, if people close their doors to you, the doors of the heavens are open for you. And the doors of heavens are open for every Muslim, for every believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah Al-Hashr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the enemies of the prophets and the messengers, the assassins of the prophets and the messengers, who attempted to assassinate our very own Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And they thought they had such fortified fences and defenses that none could penetrate. Even the Muslims believed that they could not penetrate these defenses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hashr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, جزاك الله خير. سبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم هو الذي أخرج الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب من ديارهم لأول الحشر ما ظننتم أن يخرجوا وظنوا أنهم مانعتهم حصونهم من الله فأتاهم الله من حيث لم يحتسبوا وقذف في قلوبهم الرعب Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has surprised them and has threw one of his soldiers into their hearts called fear. Just like we see today. Just like we saw on October 7th. They thought they are untouchable. They thought that they could not be destroyed. They thought that they could not be defeated. And now they're talking about, are we going to maintain our existence in the next few years? Do we have the ability to do so? By the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the answer is no. أقول قولي أستغفر. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه إن خير الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي نبيه محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. Indeed, the best of speech is the words of the Quran, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the best of guidance and the best of example to all humanity is our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whose character was the Quran. Indeed, the worst of matters are inventions and innovations in the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which are acts of misguidance, ultimately doomed to the hellfire, wal-iyadu billah. My respected brothers and sisters, we look at the news, we look at the events, and sometimes we just get used to it. We become very familiar with the bloodshed. We become very familiar with the oppression and the aggression, and that should not be the case. To the contrary, that should motivate us and instigate inside of our hearts a level of iman. Just like say, what can I do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah, I'm reminding myself just like I'm reminding you. فذكر فإن الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين. Remind them, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because reminder benefits who? The believers. And inshallah, we are believers. Think of what we can do by way of using social media, by way of signing every petition that calls for ceasefire, by way of marching in every rally against this oppression and this aggression, and everyone that are helping them and helping maintain, this oppression and this aggression. Unfortunately, they thought just like the US was taking over, of course, you talk to some politicians, they will tell you, we discovered America. You discovered America, or the Americas, and on it there were somewhere between 8 and 112 million people. This is the same discovery of Palestine. There are like millions of people living there, and the oldest city in the world is in Palestine. It's called Ariha. That is the oldest city in the world, and yet they've discovered. So therefore, we have an obligation. Our young sisters and older brothers and fathers and children are being starved to death. On top of that, there is no safe place in Gaza. In fact, now there is no safe place in Palestine in its entirety, and in southern Lebanon as well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieve their calamity and grant them victory as well. So alhamdulillah, we see some real men who fear none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who rely on none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we need to join hands to uplift this oppression, to uplift this aggression. A group of mafia like this who felt safe and secure of committing every crime on the face of the earth. Why? Because there is no punishment. Because there are no consequences. Because there are others that are helping them perpetuate their oppression and their aggression. And we need to make our voices heard. We need to open our wallets. We need to contribute as much as we can in every possible way and to each his capacity. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us among those who listen to the words of wisdom and follow the best of it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieve the calamity of every oppressed person on the face of the earth. أقول قولي أستغفر. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك اللهم لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا اللهم برحمتك شر ما قضيت فإنك إلهنا مولانا تقضي بالحق ولا يقضى عليك إنه لا يعز من عاديت ولا يذل من واليت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت اللهم يا واصل المنقطعين صلنا إليك. اللهم يا واصل المنقطعين صلنا إليك. اللهم اجعل لنا عملا صالحا يوصلنا إليك. اللهم نسألك من خيري الدنيا والآخرة، ونسألك من خير ما سألك منه نبيك وحبيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، ونعوذ بك من شر ما استعاذ بك منه نبيك وحبيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم نسألك الجنة وما قرب إليها من قول وعمل، ونعوذ بك من النار وما قرب إليها من قول وعمل. اللهم نسألك الرضا بعد القضاء، وبرد الحياة بعد الممات، والنظر إلى وجهك الكريم في غير ضراء مضرة ولا فتنة مضلة، إنك ولي ذلك والقادر عليه. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك، عدد خلقك ورضا نفسك وزنة عرشك ومداد كلماتك. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، وسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين، وأقم الصلاة. Can I have one more person here? حكم الله.
الله